From KUOW in Seattle, welcome to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. At this hour, Republicans in Congress are moving full steam ahead trying to pass President Trump's big, beautiful bill, while Democrats are working on stalling the budget package's progress through the House. That legislation, as its name implies, is pretty big. Along with extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts, it includes cuts to Medicaid and food assistance, caps on student loans, and higher fees for people going through the legal immigration process. The bill also increases spending on defense and border security. It limits taxes on workers who earn tips and increases the child tax credit. Republican lawmakers are quickly trying to meet a July 4th deadline when Trump said he wants to see the bill on his desk. The Senate passed its version on Tuesday. Now it's back in the House. And I spent the morning catching up with some Seattle area members of Congress who are trying to stop it from moving forward. First up, Susan DelBene represents Washington's 1st Congressional District and chairs the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Thank you for being here, Congresswoman.
Thanks for having me. It's an important day here in D.C.
We are talking right now at about 8 a.m. Seattle time. What is happening procedurally right now in the House? Can you just explain it for people who don't really understand how these things move forward?
So as people may know, the Senate passed this big, ugly bill and sent it back to the House. The House is now starting consideration of that bill. Right now, a rules debate is going on before a bill can come to the floor. There's kind of a rule that talks about how that comes to the floor. That debate has started right now. Then there will be a vote on that. If the rule passes, then we will consider the Senate bill, and there will be a vote on the Senate bill. So right now, we're waiting for the vote on the rule.
There was a lot of talk as the Senate was getting this pushed through about handwritten additions to the bill, last-minute changes that meant that most of the senators who were voting on the bill weren't sure of everything that was in it. Can you talk to me about the speed at which this is moving compared to the size of the legislation we are talking about?
We should be very clear, this is a big and very ugly bill. It'd be incredibly damaging to folks across the country and definitely in Washington state. You know, over 300,000 people losing health care coverage in our state, folks being left out of the full child tax credit, meaning that we're not giving the support to kids and families who need it the most, cutting nutrition programs, meaning that families and children aren't getting just basic healthy food and nutrition assistance. Republicans promised to lower costs on day one. This does nothing to lower costs. It's going to raise costs on families across the country, take away health care, drive up health care costs for folks who still do have insurance coverage, all to pay for tax breaks for the wealthiest. A lot of Republicans don't even know what's in this bill. They have been moving it so quickly and making changes. After the bill went through the House, we had Republicans saying that, well, they didn't know something was in it. Well, they know what's in it right now. They know the damage it will do, but they are still pushing forward. It would be devastating all across the country, and we're going to continue to highlight the damage this will do. And Americans across the country, including in our state, are strongly against this legislation because they know the damage it will cause to our communities.
The Congressional Budget Office estimates the Senate-passed bill would add $3.4 trillion to the nation's debt over the next 10 years. Now, that's compared to the House bill, which already added $2.4 trillion to the debt. Were you surprised that the Senate came back with a version, arguably, that is less fiscally responsible? And will that, do you think, trigger more opposition from House Freedom Caucus members who are fiscal hawks?
Well, there's nothing fiscally responsible about this bill. And as you said, the Senate made it even worse, not just in terms of the impact on the debt alone, which was already out of control, over $3 trillion and now higher, but millions more being kicked off of healthcare because of changes made in the Senate bill. 17 million people who would lose healthcare coverage in this bill. So no one should be voting for it. This impacts communities all across the country. Rural hospitals will close, energy costs will go up, food costs go up. for no reason except to give tax breaks to billionaires across the country. This has nothing to do with helping the American people. This is all about the Republicans falling in line behind Donald Trump. I don't think they're interested in hearing from their constituents. They don't want to do town halls or talk to folks. But we have seen people across the country and across our state turn out and use their voices to talk about how outraged and frankly how scared they are about the impacts this legislation would have on our communities.
On Monday night, Vice President J.D. Vance, who had to cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, he tweeted, "The thing that will bankrupt this country more than any other policy is flooding the country with illegal immigration and then giving those migrants generous benefits. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act fixes this problem, and therefore it must pass. Everything else, the CBO score, the proper baseline, the minutia of the Medicaid policy, is immaterial compared to the ICE money and immigration enforcement provisions." Your reaction to what the vice president said there?
You said one key word that I think is important. He said the minutia of Medicaid, 17 million people being kicked off of their health care. That kind of says where they stand, where the administration stand, calling that minutia, that folks are going to lose access to health care, that rural hospitals would close, that folks are going to see higher healthcare costs everywhere, people using the ER for primary care. I guess for Republicans, that's just minutia. And we should also be clear, federal Medicaid dollars do not go to folks here who are not documented, do not go to immigrants. It goes to U.S. citizens on the federal dollar. So he also isn't being clear on that point either. But Medicaid is not minutia. It's healthcare for people across our country.
You are chair of the DCCC, the campaign arm of House Democrats responsible for getting the majority back in 2026. So what's the first TV or YouTube ad hitting vulnerable Republicans in their districts? Can you give us a preview of the kind of messaging you're going to be using?
Across the country, people are concerned about the cost of living. It was the number one issue in November of 2024 in that election. It's the number one issue right now. Republicans promised to lower costs on day one. That's a big, big broken promise. We are going to hold the Republicans accountable across the country for raising costs, taking away health care from millions of people across the country. We felt the impact right at home. This bill would make it worse. We've already seen the impact of tariffs raising costs across the country and at home. The random cuts that DOJ has made to important programs that support our communities. And now you add this piece of legislation would be incredibly devastating. The American people are against this bill for a reason. They know the damage it would cause. This vote that Republicans take, if they support this bill, this is going to cost them the majority in 2026, and we're going to hold them accountable for that.
Democrats in both chambers have unanimously opposed this budget package. There are some Republicans in the House who opposed it. They fall into two camps. Usually it's folks who think the cuts were not high enough to Medicaid and other services, and folks who think the cuts were too high. Now, there have been a lot of predictions about the House Speaker having trouble pushing this forward. He did it last time. Can you give us some prognostication about the future here? I mean, do you think that they can get it passed, and do you think it'll be passed as soon as today, which is what some people are predicting?
Well, we only need 4 Republicans to vote against the bill to make it go down in the House. And they have very good reasons to vote against it. It would be damaging to their communities. But we've seen time and time again, Republicans gnash their teeth, talk about what's terrible about the bill. And they have been very clear. They think lots of things in this bill are terrible, yet they still end up voting for it in the end. We saw that the first time this bill went through the House. We saw it when it went through the Senate. It's coming back here. I expect Republicans, because they have no courage to stand up for their communities, they just fall in line with Donald Trump. I expect them to do that again. I hope that's not true. I hope some folks have the courage to stand up and support their communities and support the American people and vote against this big, ugly bill. But given what we've seen so far from Republicans, they're going to fall in line for a terrible piece of legislation. And again, it's going to cost them the majority in 2026.
Representative Suzan DelBene of Washington's 1st District. It ranges from Redmond all the way up to Arlington, a lot of areas of the east side. Really appreciate your time today. I know things are moving quickly and you have to step away from, the action to speak with me. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening to Soundside on KUOW. I'm Libby Denkman. We're going to be right back after a very short break here on KUOW. Back now with more Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman, and we've been talking today to Seattle area members of Congress about the Republican tax cut and spending package that's now making its way through the House of Representatives. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal stepped off the House floor a little bit ago to give us an update on where things stand. She's a Democrat representing Washington's 7th Congressional District, including much of Seattle, Burien, Shoreline, and Vashon Island. Congresswoman, hello, and thank you so much for joining us today on Soundside. I know it's a busy day.
It is a busy day, but I'm always happy to join you, Libby.
So as we're talking right now, the time is 11:35 in Seattle. All morning, House Republicans have been working on votes to actually bring this bill to the floor. Democrats have been trying to slow things down. What is the latest on where we're at in the process of the big, beautiful bill?
The big bad betrayal bill is what I call it. A huge betrayal of the working class, the biggest transfer of wealth from poor and middle class Americans to the wealthiest in the country, all, on the backs of cutting off 17 million people from food assistance. From health care, and 3 million from food assistance. So the latest is that they brought us all back here. This is a classic example of waste, fraud, and abuse. After a very difficult vote in the Senate, which, the bill only passed the Senate with a tie-break vote from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, they brought us all back here. They started the rules debate 1 hour after the bill had passed in the Senate, which means nobody had had a chance to even read the damn thing. And then but they bring us all back here from all over the country without knowing if they have the votes. And so all morning we have been waiting because they don't have the votes. On top of that, Livy, they actually made a big mistake in how they wrote the rule. And this is a little wonky, but procedurally, you have to order the previous question in order to end debate on a bill. They forgot to do that. So if they're forgetting how to write the rule, you can imagine what other kinds of mistakes are in the bill itself that affect the healthcare, education, nutrition assistance, the finances of every American. So we are now waiting because they had to amend the rule. That vote is on the floor right now. It's 212 to 211 against amending the rule because they have a number of Freedom Caucus members that were meeting with the president, now are literally off the floor of the House. I saw them as I was walking here to do this interview. And we will see what they decide. There are a lot of questions about whether they're going to cave, which is what they've always done, to the will of the cult leader, Donald Trump, even though they know that this is bad. And I would just say there's two sorts of Republicans that are upset about this bill. One is people who are in swing district states that perhaps Donald Trump lost or barely won, who are, have concerns about what this means if their constituents get kicked off of Medicaid. And then the other who are kind of the fiscal hawks, the people who care about the deficit, because this thing is going to explode the deficit by $3.5 trillion. The total price tag of the bill is up to $5 trillion now. They want to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. And Libby, it's hard to imagine, but the bill got worse after it left the House. So in the Senate, instead of $800 billion in Medicaid cuts, they're now up to $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. That's an additional million people that will be kicked off of health insurance. And combined with the Affordable Care Act cuts, that's about 17 million people who are going to get kicked off of health insurance, the largest loss of health care in this country under Republican rule.
I want to note that the 2-hour meeting that you just referenced with holdouts that President Trump was holding at the White House, CNN reporting that your colleague from the Washington delegation, Dan Newhouse, was also in that meeting. We have reached out to his office to invite him to come on to talk about what his concerns are with the bill and also what he and the president talked about. All we've heard back is that he will be considering, this. The direct quote is, "We will review the legislation before determining how to vote," his spokesperson told KUOW.
Well, Libby, on that, I should just say that Dan Newhouse's district has the most folks on Medicaid of any district in Washington state. So this should be of grave concern. Even when it passed the House, it should have been. But it is, I think there were some Republicans who thought that maybe the Senate would make it better and send it back to us better. The Senate made it much, much worse. So I do think that for folks like Dan, even Speaker Mike Johnson, 60% of the births in the state of Louisiana are covered by Medicaid. So I think people forget that Medicaid it's about seniors in nursing homes. It's about babies being born. It's about vulnerable families that need health care, folks with disabilities. I mean, the Medicaid population is huge, and Republican districts and states have a lot to lose. And I don't know if I can't remember now if I mentioned rural hospitals shuttering, but that will be one of the major effects is hospitals will shutter, nursing homes will close down.
Is the rapid fire speed of this moving through Congress good strategy? Because
no,
there is, a history. Obamacare, for example, was debated for something like a year, but that gave time to build a lot of opposition, and you had a lot of back and forth and people showing up to town halls and things like that. It feels like part of the reason so much is all in one bill is that you want to kind of push through before everything can be parsed out. People have time to read things. Drawn out debate can be problematic in these big legislative agenda packages. I mean, is this good strategy? You're saying no?
No, I mean, it's not good strategy in terms of good policy. It is true that you want to try and move while the momentum is good, and particularly in complex pieces of legislation where you're afraid the people won't be with you. I think if the people are with you because it's about providing health care or raising wages or things that are good for people, it might be different. But I think when you know that the people are not going to be with you, and right now this bill is underwater with people who know about it, 2-to-1. Americans, including Republicans and independents, do not like this bill. So I do think the strategy from the Republicans is try to put pressure on everybody before they hear too much from their constituents and they cave. And let's be honest, this has become a one-man cult party, and people aren't doing what their constituents need or even what their own values might be, to the extent that they have those. They just want to do whatever the president asks them to do. And so I will say that this kind of speed for a bill of this magnitude is pretty much unprecedented, because to have the Senate pass a bill and then take it up in Rules Committee in the House within an hour is, I've never seen that in the 9 years that I've been here. There usually is at least a 72-hour period for, quote, regular order, so that you can see what the Senate, and often there are mistakes that are made in this last minute drafting, and so those have to be fixed. But clearly, and the other thing, Libby, we would be back here on Monday. There's no reason for us to come back this week to do this bill, except that Donald Trump said he wanted to sign it on July 4th. So I guess this July 4th, instead of mom, apple pie, and baseball, we're going to have mom kicked out of nursing homes, apple pie for the billionaires, and healthcare for no one.
You're a progressive, so I know how you stand on the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans that are in this bill. But what about the middle class tax cuts? I mean, Republicans would say they don't want to see those expire and taxes go up for middle income earners. How do you feel about that?
Well, I posted a Washington Post article on this on my social media page because what they're saying about the tax cuts increasing for Americans is not true. I mean, they're exaggerating all the numbers substantially, and we've had amendments in this process to say, okay, just don't give tax cuts to people making over $1 billion. They won't even do that. And if you look at this bill is somewhat, I think it is unprecedented in American history because previous Republican tax bills have had something for the middle class, even if it's very small compared to the overall size of the bill, which even if you look at the TCJA, the first Republican tax scam passed under the first Trump term, they did have some money that went to the middle class. That's kind of what they're talking about. It's just that in the grand scheme of things, it was a tiny percentage. In this bill, the bottom 20% actually sees a tax increase. The next 20% sees a small tax cut. I think it was $1,600. Now, nothing's been scored with the new Senate bill, so I don't know how that's changed. But even that 1,600 goes away completely because you're raising energy costs. Utility expenses go up by $400 for the average person in America. Healthcare costs are going to go up for everyone. Nutrition assistance costs go up. Student loan costs go up because they got rid of the student loan repayment plans that we had in place. So essentially, this bill is unprecedented in that really no one except the wealthiest are getting a tax cut. And remember, Libby, that anything that they do have for the middle class or working class folks is temporary. So they expire in 2 to 3 years, whereas all of the tax cuts for the billionaires and the millionaires are permanent.
I think that there was a lot of talk in the House after passing the first version, sending it over to the Senate, that the Senate has some more moderates, the margins are slimmer, and this might end up being less of a budget impact situation once the Senate gets done with that. But that's not what we saw. Obviously, the effect on the debt is much bigger. Can I just ask about Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, because she ended up being the swing vote here. And it really felt like some old-fashioned horse trading going on. In the early hours of Tuesday, she was securing money for rural hospitals, but also very specific Alaska sweeteners, like an exemption from some of the SNAP cuts for her state and more tax deductions for whaling captains. Seriously, that whaling captains.
Yeah.
So after she voted yes, she almost immediately told the press that she hopes the House fixes this bill. She said in a statement, it's not good enough for the rest of our nation. You know, there's a lot going on there in her decision-making process, but Murkowski is known for having an independent streak. She ran a write-in campaign and won. You know, she's not beholden to the Republican Party. Were you hoping for like a dramatic John McCain-style moment from her, the thumbs down, you know, to kill the bill? Or do you think that this signals something about independence nowadays in Congress?
Yeah, I was really disappointed because obviously, you know, I know Senator Murkowski a little bit because she's often on my flight out from
That's right.
Seattle to DC. And so we have a very cordial relationship. And I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but I think she's been one of the more reasonable Republicans and has a set of values and has been attacked and has shown that independent streak. And everything in me said that she was going to reject this. And I have to say I understand you have to stand up for your constituents, but first of all, the SNAP carve-outs that she got were taken out by the parliamentarian. So her folks in Alaska are going to be subjected to, I think there's a small carve-out there, but
yeah, are you sure it was the SNAP and not the Medicaid? Because she had two sets of carve-outs, one for Medicaid and one for SNAP, and I know the Medicaid got stripped, but I didn't know the SNAP did. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would have to go back and look. I know one of them got stripped, and then the other one, she got a small carve-out. But essentially, the fund for the rural hospitals is, in my view, an acknowledgement that people are going to get kicked off of Medicaid, that your rural hospitals are going to close, and that to keep them open, you have to subsidize them. But remember that emergency care is way more expensive than just getting the care you need on Medicaid to start with. And so people are now going to have to go to these hospitals to get care. And it just seems like it's a very selfish, it's also just an acknowledgement that it's terrible for everybody. And so it's a very selfish and cruel and expensive settlement to get your vote, to give your vote. And then, I just don't know how she could even say this. She then came out and said, well, she hopes that the House will vote no on the bill that she had the power to vote no on and put an end to this and demand that they go back to the cutting board. If she thought it was imperfect, it is the Senate's job to take the House bill and to fix it, and not to vote yes on it with a couple of carve-outs that you get for your state, which are still going to keep your state. It's still bad policy for her state and for her constituents, and it is certainly devastating. This is now going to be her legacy, which honestly saddens me, because I think she could have had that John McCain moment, and she certainly is somebody who has demonstrated independence and real values in the past. And this was, it was a real disappointment.
We heard from Congresswoman Susan DelBene several hours ago saying she thinks even with these holdouts that it'll be the same thing we saw in the first version in the House, that eventually Republicans will get on board and pass this thing. Do you agree?
I think eventually they will pass something, and it will be very bad. I don't quite know if I don't know if they're going to be able to do it this week. I think it may be that it waits, or it may be that they all cave. I mean, we're so used to seeing them come out hot and swinging and saying they're not going to vote for things, and then all it takes is one call from the president, and then they're bending the knee and giving the big leader what he wants. And so, I'm not holding out hope that they're going to hold out. But I do think for a couple of them, and you can see it with what Tom Tillis said, what others said, that this will be a vote, particularly for those people in swing districts. This is going to be a vote that could be determinative for whether or not they continue to stay in power. So, maybe they feel like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. Because either Trump goes after them or their constituents go after them. But in that situation, I would hope that they would pick doing the thing that's right for their constituents.
Tom Tillis, though, leaving the Senate now, that he's stood up and said no. Yeah.
Yeah. And and Don Bacon in the House, from Nebraska, also saying that he's going to not seek reelection. I think that, any of the moderate, sometimes I get questions from people saying, well, can you work with the moderate Republicans? And I'm like, there are none left. I mean, if you look at all the Republicans that were on bipartisan bills in the past, whether it was comprehensive immigration reform or child tax credit or whatever, they're all gone. They're all gone, Libby. And I think there's very, very few that are willing to stand up to Trump. And it's very sad, because it's the state of the institution has been so downgraded and demeaned by the state of the Republican Party today.
I will say New York Times reporting on that 2-hour meeting between the holdouts, Republican members of Congress, and Trump. The reporting is that there were lengthy discussions about changes to healthcare programs. Now Speaker Johnson saying there are a lot fewer no votes, but we're not sure what those changes, if they're talking about changes to Medicaid, if that means those are going to end up changing in the final version of the bill. We'll keep watching that. Before we go, Congresswoman, your district obviously overwhelmingly opposed to Trump and his policies. Many of the folks who are your constituents marched in the No Kings rally that you spoke at a few weekends ago. But this stuff is happening. I mean, the balance of Congress is what it is right now. For somebody watching this who's really frustrated and feels helpless, what do you say to them?
I say to them that everything they do to fight back matters. It may not feel like it. It may feel like you're just going to a rally or you're calling your member of Congress. Of course, if they're in my district, I tell them to make a list of 10 people that they know in Republican districts and call those people and ask them to call in. Every bit that you do actually is part of building the momentum and the scale of mass disruption and resistance that we need to take on a dictator or an authoritarian. That's what I teach in my resistance lab. The next one is coming up on July 13th. You can sign up at resistancelab.us. We have to understand that they succeed when we feel powerless. And so to find 3 things that you can do and know that they are making a difference. You may not see it today, but they are part of the giant constellation of resistance actions that ultimately make a difference. Because if people start to feel helpless and they just say, you know what, I'm not going to do anything because it doesn't make a difference, that is actually playing into what the other side wants. We can win. We have won a lot of things. There were a lot of things that got stripped out of this bill in the Senate. And I think people should remember that, the restrictions on gender affirming care,
AI regulation
for
yeah.
Medicaid, AI regulations, the provision that would have allowed courts to limit, basically to not hold anyone in the government accountable in contempt, that was stripped out. So there were a number of things that were stripped out. And I think people just have to remember that the unpopularity of this bill today is because of everyone who has been standing up, who has been going to the rallies, who's been talking about it. We have to just keep doing it, just keep pressing repeat and finding new ways to stand up and really stand. I would say immigration is another area where it has made such a difference. Mahmoud Khalil would not be free if it weren't for people across this country talking about it. Rameza Ozturk would not be free if it weren't for people. There are people who have been helped by community members encircling courts and homes and refusing to allow ICE agents in. That is all making a difference. And we have to remember that we can't allow, a lot of this is testing the limits of what people in a democratic society will accept. And if we sit back because we're frustrated, it looks like we're accepting these things versus standing up and resisting. And I believe that we will win. We just may not win quite as quickly as we want.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, I should say when we say AI regulation was stripped out of the Senate version, we mean that the moratorium
the
on
states,
to ban, to be able to actually pass regulations, which a number of Republicans said they did not know was in the House version that they voted for.
That's right.
That's the way this set of policies is getting kind of really moved so quickly. People are catching up after the fact. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington's 7th District, thank you very much.
Thank you, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.